Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Beit Midrash. It's a circular Beit Midrash in a way. It's the first Beit Midrash of the year, L'Shana Tova, and the last Beit Midrash of our book of Judaism's life-changing ideas. So, for those watching later, and for those of you on now, and those watching later, if you have not already voted for what we're going to learn next, please send me your votes. Would love to hear from you. And if you have already sent your votes, as I said in my email this week, we are not my sweet home Chicago. Um, do not vote early and vote often. So just vote once, and I'll tally it, and we'll go from there. But Lashana Tova, glad you're here. Glad to be learning together in 5785 for the first time in 5785. So we got a busy day today. We're going to try to wrap up the Torah a little bit before Simchat Torah. That's the challenge when Simchat Torah falls on our Beit Midrash day. We'll try to cover Parshat Hazinu, which we read last Shabbat, and Parshat V'zot HaBracha, which is the last parsha of the reading, last parsha of the Torah, which we only read on Simchat Torah. So we'll start with Parshat Hazinu, a chapter called Emotional Intelligence. Want to open it up if people want to add any thoughts, comments, reactions, other than it seemed a little longer than our average reading. But
So,
yes, Diane.
so before we get into it, I have two things I wanted to say. And number one, we are so lucky, Rabbi, that you were here and that you're willing to teach us after the 3 days of services last week and three funerals this week. Anyone could understand why you would want to bow out. So I personally am grateful. I feel sure everyone else is too. Secondly, I wanted to ask you just real briefly, and I don't remember what we do when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbat, but you don't say a Kiddush, you don't say the Shabbat blessing, you don't recite the Shabbat blessings if you're going to be in synagogue at 5:45. Is that right? How does that work? I'm
So
confused.
Yom Kippur takes precedence over Shabbat. It is the only time when you fast on Shabbat. And part of that is because it is referred to in the Torah as Shabbat Shabbaton, as the Shabbat of Shabbats. So it's like Hashem is the King of Kings. This is Shabbat or Yom Kippur is the Shabbat of Shabbats. So it takes precedence over Shabbat. So there are a couple insertions and things that you do for Shabbat that get worked in. So instead of Mikadesh Yisrael, there's a long blessing for it, but you say Mikadesh HaShabbat Yisrael, all the other things. So there are some tweaks in the service that you do to include Shabbat. But no, you don't do kiddush. You don't get hamotzi. Sorry, y'all. Fasting still
Okay.
happens, unless you're physically unable to, or I should say medically unable to. Excuse me. You don't say Avinu Malkeinu. Like there's a couple prayers like that get left off because they're considered petitionary and not said on Shabbat. So on when Yom Kippur is on Shabbat, you only say Avinu Malkeinu and Ne'ilah as your ending.
So our temple website says the service starts at 5:45 and you're to light candles at like 5:59 or something.
Yeah.
And that really threw me off.
Yeah. So part of from a technical perspective, Kol Nidre is a prayer, but is more than a prayer. It's a legal formula that negates all vows um, vows, oaths, the like. And so to do that, you need a Beit Din, and a Beit Din cannot meet on Yom Tov. So therefore you're supposed to recite Kol Nidre before the holiday technically starts, like a little bit before the holiday starts, so that the Beit Din can be present in order to nullify your vows and oaths. So that's why we're starting a little bit before candle lighting, so that we can do that ideally before Shabbat gets in, and Yom Kippur. Anything else before we go dive into our commentary?
Thank you.
A fine question. So any reactions to Rabbi Sacks's emotional intelligence? And if you want to change lives, you need to speak to people's feelings, not just their minds. That actually came in handy this week. Somebody was asking me a question. I said, you can't. He said, how can I change? How do I change the minds of those who disagree with me? I'm like, you can't do it intellectually. You need to do it emotionally. So that was nice because it came in handy this week. Yes, TK. After you're muted.
Okay. So just yesterday, I was talking to the class, the creative writing class that I do, and the word that I picked to talk about was resonate, which they had no idea what that meant. And then I read today's lesson, of course, at the last minute today, and it resonated with what I was talking about. So it gave me a new word to talk to them about, and also and it empowers them to reach other people, which was my point, in that you write with your heart and your head, and you want to resonate with other people. And so you use your heart to do that, but you also use your head to call on all the skills that you have in order to make that emotion resonate with others. That's it.
Anybody else have a thought, comment, or reaction? Yes, Stuart.
So I think this chapter goes to what my basic philosophy is about left and right brain thinking. So classically, left brain thinking is real analytic, numerical. Right brain thinking is more emotive and emotional. So, and it typically, there are what I consider masculine and feminine traits. So everybody has some variable amounts of both of them. Classically, men have more masculine, women have more feminine, but all of us have both. So my question is, I mean, you can learn left brain things. You can learn, how to do. If you play bridge, you can learn a new bidding system for bridge, right? I mean, you can learn new facts, new ways of doing things. But can you learn to have more emotional intelligence? Can the right brain be restructured so that you can become more empathetic, or do you just have to live with what you have? Rabbi.
This is where I wish our resident psychologist, Dr. Lindner, was here to assist with it, but I'll have to go on my own. I do think you can. I do think you can develop a greater emotional intelligence over time. Um, I think generally our society prioritizes logical, rational, analytic thinking. Um, we've kind of trended largely towards um, the math and the science as a whole. And if you can't show it and prove it, then is it really true? Um, but you can train your brain to access your emotions in a different way. That analytic thinking kind of shuts down or overrides a lot of the emotional thinking at times. And though I would argue the emotional thinking is still doing the work, you're just not as conscious of it happening. Um, I think, though, that you can train your brain to be more cognizant and aware and develop that emotional intelligence. You just need, like any skill, you need to have the will and the desire and the put in the effort to develop it.
Well, and yeah, in schooling, classically, we teach left brain things. That's what you learn. So I'm not sure we know exactly how. I think you could, but I'm not sure exactly how you teach emotional intelligence. So if women tend to be more right brain people, the feminine characteristics more right brain, male more left brain, for instance, then I would say we need more women leaders. We need more people who have better emotional intelligence and uh, can understand people's feelings. I mean, that's one of the take comes from this is that if you want to change lives, speak to people's feelings, not just to their minds. So we need more women leaders, I think.
Well, I'm going to 100% agree with you there. But I will say, in terms of, I mean, what strikes me in emotional intelligence, a lot of it is empathy and hearing people's stories, even reading novels, just reading and putting yourself into someone else's life in that way, that makes you more empathetic. So certainly, in the same way you can learn math and science, you can learn empathy. Now, some people are going to have blocks against it, just like some people can't do math. I mean, everyone doesn't have the same ability to learn it, but there are certainly ways we can teach it. And what concerns me is about all this is I think with all the internet and social media, I think we're growing a generation of, more than a generation at this point, of people whose emotional intelligence is really lacking because you have to be around people to understand people. Scary.
And you have to be around people who are not like you.
Yes.
Like, you need to be willing to engage with people who are different than you are. Otherwise, you're just hearing the same stories in different perspectives. Barbara? Brandy?
Other Barbara. I was going to say that I think the way it's worded can be misconstrued. I'm sure he would think of it as misconstrued in a negative way, because if you want to change people's lives, speak to their feelings, and fear is a feeling. And I think you can scare people into doing things that certainly aren't what their intellect would tell them to do, but fear is very strong.
Yes.
So
Fear.
it can be.
So,
go ahead.
Again, I wish Dr. Lindner was here to give me the accurate information, but my understanding is fear is a powerful short-term motivator. People will do things for a short period of time because they are afraid of what would happen if they didn't, or vice versa. Like, they won't do things for a short period of time because they're afraid of what will happen if they do it. But it's not a great long-term motivator. You
if
need
you keep
something
reminding me of my fear, it's wonderfully long term. It's effective.
Like my understanding is, if you really want to change effective behavior, like effectively change behaviors, fear is not the best way to do it, because eventually either the person develops anxiety, which is counterproductive, or they just overcome their fear and it's no longer the motivator. There's better ways to motivate. Like, you're right in I agree with you in that you could read this in the opposite direction of what Rabbi Sacks intends.
Well, he was very careful to say, take people's fears and assuage them. He didn't say manipulate them. He said assuage them.
You could read the final principle in that way, yes. I'm not going to say too much more, only because this is part of my Kol Nidre sermon, so I don't want to, spoil too much. Yes, TK.
You're muted. Okay.
Give me a second. Just wanted to say that was a note that I made, was that this could, exactly what Barbara's point was, that it can be used in a negative way. And the other thing, which I think we've said before, is that, perhaps fear is not the best long-term motivator, but it is the best short-term motivator, because we are seem to be hardwired to attend to the negative first, which makes sense from a survival point of view, in that, it's more important to know what can hurt you than what might help you in the long run. Just from the way our brains develop, which is why the newspapers do, if it bleeds, it leads, because that gets we're tuned to put our attention on the negative in order to survive. Because
yes. I have seen some arguments that, in fact, that a lot of the health issues that we're facing as society, a lot of our long-term health issues, are really products of fear more than anything else. That we have created so much fear and anxiety within our culture that everybody's so chronically on edge, and that creates physical problems in terms of chronically elevated cortisol levels, that then eventually your body develops that, and you need to do more, which then has other effects on your body, which then has other effects on your health, and so on and so forth. Yes, our bodies we're biologically designed to react to stress in a specific way so that we can prioritize our survival. The question, in that context, the question is, how do we break that so that we're not living our lives constantly and chronically on edge?
Stop watching the news.
It won't hurt.
That's my prescription.
But it is still important to know what's going on in the world. So
you can read. Watching is very different than reading about it.
That is true.
I think.
I don't know. I'd have to do research on the studies. I don't know if you were to watch a news report and read the exact same news report, whether there's a biologically different reaction.
Okay, but the point is, it's not the same, because I feel like these news channels, they have to fill all their time. So they just get kind of crazier and crazier because they're just trying to get an audience, whereas a written word is trying to be accurate because it's going to be there forever. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like a sense it's trying to be more documentarian about it, trying to.
I mean, I'm not entirely
convinced
that's the case.
Huh?
I'm not entirely convinced that's true. I think the written word is also trying to sell. It's just trying to sell in a different medium. But I am oddly fascinated by this question of if there's a different biological reaction to reading a report versus seeing the exact same report on TV. I have no clue whatsoever, but it sounds like a fascinating study to do. Diane?
You're muted, babe.
So from my comments last Saturday at services, several people may know that I'm one who suffers from the news. I don't watch much news, but I listen to a lot of it. And the difference for me in reading and listening is that if it's too much to bear, I can go to the next article. But when you're listening, then you have to figure out, if I'm not going to listen to this, do I turn it off? Do I look for something else that's more bearable? And it's a whole different thought process. So I am listening very little and reading a lot more, and having a much better life. Thank you, Rabbi. I turned it off. It's just too hard. And if you have not noticed, I will share with you that I've noticed that those announcers who are reporting news, they are becoming more and more animated. I mean, they are really, the days of Walter Cronkite are, that's what they need to study when they become newscasters. But then they wouldn't get an audience. But they're not reporting. They're acting out these stories to keep your attention.
And I think we find that news is no longer as objective as it once tried to be. So even reading or watching, there can be significant bias in what we're reading. And that just means you need to know where you want to get your news from. Don't choose this, get it from somewhere else, whether you're reading or watching. So I do think that it's an interesting question what the response is to reading. But as people read less and less because they have all this opportunity to just have it fed to them, maybe we're also looking at a emotionally unintelligent group of generation that can't read. So then that becomes a problem.
They can't read and they can't write.
That's true.
Which means that their memory is steadily impaired by just not being able to. It's one more layer of recall.
I have one observation, which I'd like to see what people feel about the news, which is, to me, it seems like, NBC, I mean, the stations that seem to promulgate more democratic types of news are more analytic. I mean, you listen to them and they build a logical argument. And if they do that successfully, I think that spills over into your right brain, into your emotional intelligence, and you understand it in a feeling sort of way. Whereas, the Fox News, the more, I think, right-wing people tend to immediately go for your emotions. I mean, they yell at you. They don't build a logical argument. They just tell their opinions, and they hope that by doing it in a strong way, that it will convert your feelings to the same thing. So I just see this Republican Democratic approach to understanding our issues out there is distinctly different. And I was wondering what other people might say. Is that an accurate observation?
Do you want to go on record on this? I mean, I just
I will
know.
not comment. I will comment in terms of what I have heard broadly, which I have heard people say, they feel like they can't relate to Democratic candidates, or they don't feel like they can vote for them because they're not talking to them, or they're talking at them. They're not talking with them. This kind of idea, and there is an idea. There is out there this, the Democrats being the intellectual elite. The sense that they are, that they don't understand what is going on in those under, quote unquote, under them. I have heard that criticism more than once in various places, which seems to go along somewhat with what you're saying as well.
Well, I think the Democratic people are failing to speak to people's emotions, to their feelings, as much as Republicans do, and they need to do a better job at that if they want to be successful.
Well, that's kind of what Rabbi Sacks says too. That would be,
right.
Rabbi Sacks would make that argument as well. You want, and he makes some interesting points in here as well. He makes a distinction between halacha and agadah. That halacha, if you read the Gemara, if you read the Talmud, is very straightforward. These are the facts. This is what's going on. This is the debate. This is why the debate is these are the outlines of the premise. Agadah comes in to soften it and kind of explain. So and sometimes the Agadah comes in to prove or disprove the halachic argument that just happened. So the one that I always think of is there's a discussion in Masechet Brachot in the Talmud near the beginning too, that talks about if you're suffering, if you're going through something, first you should see if you did something wrong to deserve it. That's where the rabbis go first. And if you can't figure out what it is, then maybe God is causing you to suffer because God loves you. And they go through a lengthy intellectual conversation about, why God would punish you because God loves you. The conclusion of that story is a series of conversations of a rabbi getting sick and another rabbi coming to visit them. And, the visiting rabbi says, essentially says, is it worth it? Like, is your suffering dear to you because it makes you know that God loves you? And the sick rabbi responds every time, neither this nor its reward. Like, I don't really care. Like, when I'm sick, I'm suffering, I don't really care if God loves me at this moment. I don't care this is awful. And the way my teacher Reb Bibi Feigelson taught it is, why does this Agadah come at this point? And as she argues it, this conversation is a wonderful conversation to have in the Beit Midrash. It's a fascinating philosophical conversation that doesn't apply in real life. And the Agadah comes in to kind of negate and cancel and wipe out everything that they just talked about, because it's a great philosophical point. But you can't actually apply it to this world. And so what's the point there is the Agadah speaks to the emotions. It says, great, this is an intellectual conversation. Can you actually live it and feel it and make it a part of you? And if you can't, then why are we having this conversation still? I was flipping through also, and there's, he makes a distinction between the priest and the prophet. And I was thinking about it, we still have conversations in modern times about who are prophetic figures, who are the prophets of our times. And Rabbi Sacks talks about, the priests are the intellectuals. The priest thinks in terms of universal rules that are eternally valid. It's at the bottom of 300. The prophet is attuned to the particularities of a given situation and the relationships between those involved. We talk about who are the prophets, who are the ones with the emotional intelligence. We don't ask who are the priests. We think about who are the ones who actually change the world through their emotion, like through speaking to people's hearts and being able to affect change by enacting their emotions, not the people who are walking through enabling the rules and searching for the rules to follow. There's a balance between them. You need both ultimately, but we don't ask about the rules, we ask about the emotions and the feelings.
Well, and your point being there that because the emotions are more that's what can change us, that they're more important in a change time.
Yeah,
that's what don't ask. Okay.
Yeah. What's the Maya Angelou quote? People will forget what you did for them. People will forget what, I can't remember the whole quote, but they'll always remember the way you made them feel.
Yes, that's it.
I don't remember the exact, I remember the punchline. I don't remember the exact, all of that comes before.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that's what Rabbi Sacks is trying to argue too, is, you need the intellect. You need to think things through. You need rationale. I don't think he's saying you don't. But you need to combine that with emotional intelligence, and you need to combine that with making people feel a certain way if you're actually going to be effective in getting people to understand, and if you want people to change the way they live their lives. For the sake of time, I do want to get to this last chapter too, the Unfinished Symphony, which actually, this was one of my favorite chapters personally, but anybody want to chime in, reactions, thoughts to it?
I thought this was a good one to end on because I enjoyed what it said because it can explain so much or comfort you under certain circumstances. So much as I have argued with Rabbi Sacks a few times during his book, this one I really liked. That's not my intellectual or my emotional response. That's just.
Well,
is an emotional response.
I just never had thought before about Moses not getting to see the promised land because that was an example we would need to see, and his imperfection also be an example we would need to see. I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense to me, and I like that explanation the best of any of the few others that I've heard. It's sort of circular, like it happened like this, but I think that's the way I see the Torah anyway, is that its purpose is to teach us, not necessarily tell us the truth of what happened.
Yeah. I really like this quote towards the bottom of 306. I feel like it's a really good, this in itself is a Yom Kippur sermon. That is what it is to be human. Even the greatest human beings made mistakes, failed as often as they succeeded, and had moments of black despair. What made them great was not that they were perfect, but that they kept going. They learned from every error, refused to give up hope, and eventually acquired the great gift that only failure can grant, namely humility. They understood that life is about falling 100 times and getting up again. It's about never losing your ideals, even when you know how hard it is to change the world. It's about getting up every morning and walking one more day toward the promised land, even though you know you may never get there, but knowing also that you helped others get there. That's like a Yom Kippur sermon in and of itself.
Yeah, and the whole deal about Lador Vador. I mean, a lot of this chapter was about how your own personal growth, and are you going to you make mistakes? Are you going to continue? How do you how do you go beyond your failures? But to me, the bigger deal is how you pass these things on to the next generation and inspire them in a way. And that's a great way to end our discussion, because yes, we've done what we've done, but let's hope that our next generation continues on with what we started.
And it starts out in a good way also, because it says, make every day count. And I think that that's a great way to consider living.
Yeah. Do a little better today than you did yesterday. And when you don't, when you do a little worse than you did yesterday, then tomorrow try to do a little better than you did today.
Sounds like a diet.
Ooh.
Yeah. And it's the same principle, isn't it? That you're slowly trying to change behavior. In a diet sense, you're slowly trying to change your eating behavior. That's why a lot of these sudden diets don't work, because you can't just jump into it. You need to gradually, slowly change what you do and the way you eat and your relationship with food. That seems to be, the research keeps coming back, that seems to be the more effective method overall, is gradual change rather than sudden change.
You know, it's interesting when it said make every day count, and maybe this is just where my head is right now, but I didn't take that to mean, and now that I hear you say it, I think it is what it meant, but I didn't take that to mean do better every day and get towards your goal every day. I took it to mean enjoy every day, and do things that make your life meaningful, whatever that may be. So
Barbara, sorry, I hear what you're saying as the feminine emotional intelligence,
right?
Interpretation of that.
Thank you.
You know, I don't think he's not saying that either. You know, part of what he tries to say in this chapter too is ultimate, another good, high holiday message generally. We're not immortal. At some point, inevitably, whether we like it or not, each of us is going to die. So, what can we do with our finite time on this earth to enjoy it, but also to make it a little better than it was? And, frankly, sometimes making it better than it was means taking some time to enjoy what's here. He said this somewhere else, where you can't change the world forever. Like you need Shabbat, you need a break, you need a time to enjoy the fruits of your labor and to see what you're doing and to see that you're actually making a difference and take a step back to actually process and enjoy it and recharge so that you can go forward after that. I don't think the two interpretations are mutually exclusive, is I think my larger point. Enjoy it, yes, and do something good with it at the same time. And when you don't, and when you make a mistake, learn from it so that you can grow and keep moving forward. Other thoughts, comments?
I loved the idea that your failures are a gift. I really never thought about it like that. And the gift they give you or can give you the gift of humility, which we also need.
Yeah, I'll say the gift of humility, and I'll add to that the gift of growth also. There's a great teaching that I use around this time of year a lot, where I says that a Baal Tshuva, someone who has done the work of tshuva, of repentance, of turning around, can reach a higher place than even a completely righteous individual. And I love that, because if you're completely righteous, if you're perfect, where do you go from there? There's nothing for you to grow from, because you're perfect. There's nothing you can't get better than that. But somebody who makes mistakes and grows and learns from it, and it becomes humbled by it and learns how to change because of it, gets to a higher level than even the righteous do, because they have the ability to continue growing beyond that moment.
It's funny, Rabbi, because I remember the first time I heard this when I was much younger, and I did not like it. I did not like the idea that someone who failed and then grew from it was actually more righteous than someone who was just righteous. That did not seem fair. But now, as a wiser older woman, I do understand that what you said is part of it, but also to really have empathy for other people, to have empathy for someone who's failing and doing something that you consider wrong or whatever. You have to have failed yourself. So I mean, all those things go into it. It grows your empathy as well as your humility. And I also just want to make the point that not everyone is too arrogant. Like, some of these assumptions, like it helps you grow in humility. Some people are too humble and need to grow in arrogance, because there does need to be a balance. So, yeah, just want to say that.
Reb Mimi, it's a good day because I keep thinking of Reb Mimi. Reb Mimi had made the argument that, overabundance of humility is as much of a transgression as an overabundance of arrogance. Because there comes a point where if you are so humble, you feel like you can't do anything. And you don't do anything. You don't try to make the world better because you don't feel like you ever have the ability to do so. And that's as big of a transgression as thinking you're arrogant. And Rabbi Sacks talks about this a little bit here too, is, the two temptations that have faced Homo sapiens since the beginning: to think of ourselves as smaller than we actually are, or greater than we actually are. Mm-hmm. That's why I always like the old, I think it was Reb Simcha Bunim of Peshischa, who famously used to carry 2 notes in his pocket, right? You guys remember this? Mm-hmm. He has 2 notes in his pocket. One said, "I am but dust and ashes," and the other one said, "For my sake the world was created."
Wow.
We are neither one. We are both. And that, I think, that's the important point to remember, that, we are both so little. We are this dust. We are but dust and ashes. We're but specks on this world. But it was for my sake this world is here, so that I have a role in it and to make it a better place. And so they are both simultaneously true, and our job is to find the way to live in between those 2 poles. Not at either one, but in between them both. Laura, did you have something? It looked like you had your hand up for a second.
I, I, I have first. I would like to apologize. In the beginning of this, I had to deal with something with my partner, and so I didn't. Yeah, I might have missed that we talked about on the first one. The irony of him talking about how Yale University used to have what he referred to like as a smidgen of anti-Semitism, and now it's so great, and here we are with all of our, Yale and Harvard and our big schools being basically anti-Semitic again, and so did we talk about that?
Didn't talk about that.
No, I was gonna let that one go because
Oh, okay.
this book was written a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly. He passed away, I believe, in 2020, if I remember correctly.
Right.
This book was published in 2020. I'm not quite sure when exactly he wrote that, so I was going to give them the benefit of the doubt for the moment in time that he was.
Oh yeah, well, sure, but it's still ironic and kind of scary too. It's in the history repeats itself kind of way. I just immediately started thinking about, because I still have a really hard time, not wanting to get real political here, but understanding why this political race for the president is so close, because it just seems like it ought not to be. And but it does give explanation to, Trump seems to really push the fear side and that emotional thing. And so maybe that's the whole explanation.
So,
but I'm sorry, and that Harris really, I mean, I think she's going to be a good president, but I don't think her skills are in communicating that emotional, it's like she can't change over or have a right and left brain coming together. I don't know. I'm not making sense, but
I'll say two things. I say we did talk a little bit earlier about, the Democrats seem to be the more intellectual, analytical.
Well, yeah.
The Republicans using more of an emotional method, which, as Rabbi Sacks says, is more effective. To play, not to take sides, but to, play devil's advocate for a moment. I think, you brought up the issue of the protests on college campuses. And I think that highlights, where a lot of people are feeling uncomfortable in this electoral season. That for a party that toots diversity and communication and cooperation and that talks about how we need to build strong coalitions and diverse coalitions, actively shutting down an entire group because of their cultural identity completely runs counter to that. And this isn't exactly news. This is, there have been talks about this going on in DEI circles for several years now of, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but Jews were often shut out of those spaces. And they would actively, sometimes passively, sometimes actively, exclude Jews from the conversation. So I think from there, you get a little bit of where some people are a little more on the fence or concerned, in that, you know, you talk about diversity, you talk about equality, you talk about inclusion, but you're not doing it. And that's, I think, where some people are also getting frustrated or hesitant, is, you know, it's really nice to talk about these values, but if you're not going to show it, then, and show it equally to everybody, then, you know, why does that work?
I just feel the need to say that this is not a mainstream tendency. This is an extreme. So you're talking about an extreme and painting a party with an extreme, and I just want to make that statement.
Yeah,
but
no, yes, and I just, before you go on, I just want to say, you know, we do that on both sides. So, and I'm not advocating for one party or the other. I know. I just wanted to explain a little bit why I think there are people who are on the fence because of things along that line. Go ahead, Barbara Ayland. I didn't want to.
I find it more scary.
Barbara Ayland was still talking, but
I was going to change the subject. So go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, because mine is related to this Jewish religion issue. I find it more disturbing from anti-Semitism. I know how I would handle it. I would be more, you know, the non-discriminatory person, but I find it very disturbing that people are being told whose fault a loss for Mr. Trump would be. That's scary to me. How can you lay that all on the Jews? And the fact that you are mentioning that is very scary to me, or that you are pushing that is very scary.
Not disagreeing with that statement either. And I think, you know, there are people who see comments like that and, you know, are hesitant about voting Republican. You know, I try very hard not to play. I try to play the politics down the middle publicly. You can talk to me privately about what I really think. But, you know, I did want to Laura's point, I did want to point out, you know, why this is so close. I think there are lots of reasons this is so close. You know, what I explained is one of them, but you know, there's a lot of issues at play on both sides that make this a difficult election to predict what's going to happen.
Rabbi, may I ask a quick, unrelated but unrelated question, which is there a kind, if you go to a ladies' luncheon in the South, it's very different from one in the North, or where I was living in Washington, where everybody argued about everything, and there was no subject that was verboten. But in Birmingham, you've really done something terrible to your group of friends if you bring up politics. That spoils the day for them.
Is that always been, or is it just now? Because I think now that's probably true everywhere.
I think it has always been true with a certain group of people that I started grammar school with. You know, it's not a matter of choice in later life. You've inherited these relationships, and with it, you get those opinions and attitudes and blindness, and not even realizing that they said something like the N-word, but for Jews, with me sitting at the table, to whose temple they have often visited. It's just too delicate and too deeply rooted a problem. And
look, I mean, I grew up with the proverb, you know, there are two things you never talk about in polite company: politics and religion.
Right. Well,
because they're seen as divisive they're seen as divisive conversations. Look, I disagree with the proverb on principle, because I do think conversation and relationship is the only way to actually bring us more together. I think avoiding the conversation just lets things bubble up and fester in ways that they come out in a different way. But that being said, you don't want to get into an argument at a ladies' lunch either, so you just avoid the topics.
But it makes you not want to go again.
That would be true. I mean, it reminds me of. So, Ellen, are you saying that they actually said something that was anti-Semitic, but didn't realize it was anti-Semitic?
They don't realize.
Well, it reminded me of a story that I have when I was a kid, grammar school, and I remember it vividly, in a lunch line, and my friend said something about Jewing you down on something. And I said, I take offense to that. And I don't think she ever put together the two things, that would be offensive to a Jewish person. And so I think that
it's our responsibility.
I mean, I had to respond because she was my best friend. But I think in responding, I made her stop and think, and maybe changed something, how she looked at something for the rest of her life. So I think we're obligated to point out when people are saying things, especially if we don't think they realize what they are saying.
They don't know. They realize wrong. They may whisper, but they don't apologize.
Mm-hmm.
They know, they see me sitting at the other end of the table, but the apology does not come unless I get up, which I've stopped doing. I'm losing friends left and right.
They're not friends.
Stopped doing to a point, but I do it when we're alone. Just the two.
And have you found that to make any difference in what they say when you're not alone?
It brings forth just profuse apologies. And they're horrified. I said this, and I give them some racial parallels. And they listen, and they don't do it again.
Well,
so I know it's getting late, but I know Barbara Ayland had one other thing she wanted to bring up before. So and then
this is a good thing to end on, because I just wanted to thank all of you for bringing me to Rabbi Sacks, and I was amazed at Rosh Hashanah. I heard at least two rabbis, and the rabbi I was listening to on Rosh Hashanah, and maybe a third. All of them quoted Rabbi Sacks, and I knew exactly what they were talking about. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Bowman in New Orleans talked about optimism and hope, which, we had. This was our other class. Was this class or the other class? It was this class. And we had so much trouble with the idea about optimism and hope being different. But now I was able to understand her sermon because I understood the difference, because we had talked about it in class. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us. It's great to have people.
Yes. I have had other things by Jonathan Sacks and the motorcycle riding relative that he had, medical. But if anybody has a recommendation for 2 or 3 other Sacks books, I've read several, but it kind of makes me want to read them all.
So Rabbi Sacks teaches, and I don't remember which book, but he teaches that if you're only talking to people that you agree with, you're wasting your time.
Wasting time.
Yeah, and I think the challenge for me is to find a way to communicate with those people that I don't agree, because he's not the only one that teaches that. And that is a real challenge, but I think it's up to all of us to figure out how we can do it.
First of all, you move close to where they're living and you put yourself in the midst of them.
Right.
What happens? It's fascinating. Birmingham's coming back to live downtown. There's at least 3 of everything you might want to talk to on the street at any one given moment, or in the restaurants. Off the topic.
So I want to thank y'all. Kol hakavod on. We did it. We got through Rabbi Sacks. Hooray! Again, there will not be class the next 2 weeks. Both Thursdays are Yom Tov. So first come hear TK on Shabbat. She'll be speaking here on Shabbat at Bethel after the sermon. So it depends how long I talk. Depends what time.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
And then Sukkot next Thursday, and Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah the following Thursday. So I hope y'all will come and celebrate together and be together for all that. And then if you have not voted, October 21st, Chol HaMoed Sukkot, let me know your votes by the end of the day. And then on the 22nd, when I email y'all to remind you we're not having class on the 24th, I'll also let you know what our next topic will be. So if you haven't voted yet,
Please
let me know what you'd like to do. In the meantime, Gemar Chatima Tova, wishing you all to be sealed well, and hope to celebrate Yom Kippur with each of you this week.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.